And that's really what started happening. So they lost the Marxist view, the Leninist view, even though they still had the pictures of Marx and Lenin. They still had nationalized property in the Soviet Union. They still had a burgeoning economy that they were pumping because there was no profit motive in the Soviet Union. But a bureaucracy encrusted itself and started repressing. At first, just people would lose jobs, lose positions. Some people were exiled. Few were jailed, and then more and more were jailed, and some were exiled, like Leon Trotsky, who was really, with Lenin, the two leaders. They were the two leaders of the Russian Revolution. And eventually, they would jail many, many more people, not just followers of Trotsky, who was a preeminent leader of what was called the left opposition, but Stalin then started persecuting anybody who criticized them, no matter from what direction, and then new layers would be upset, something would happen on the world level, and there was more and more repression, and more executions, and by 1930s, most of the entire old Bolsheviks, those who had made the revolution, had been either exiled or killed, mostly killed, some of them just jailed, some of them made to renounce their former beliefs, and the bureaucracy was in place. Now that coincided, having said that, communism did not give birth to Stalinism or Stalin. Communism, under certain conditions of extreme poverty, backwardness, 14 armies invading where many of the best revolutionaries were killed at the time of the revolution and the Civil War. These very concrete conditions gave rise to Stalin. In our own time, we've seen the Cuban Revolution. It does not exhibit, because some people want to say, well, communism and Stalinism are the same thing. And we can see that China had a completely different development, did not have the same type of bureaucracy established, in the same way. They've had other problems. Cuba certainly maintains a world revolutionary perspective and has not had this encrusted bureaucracy and conservative leadership. So to say that communism and repression are the same, communism and Stalinism are the same, is incorrect. But who would use that? Well, people who didn't want the workers to think that they might have a right to run the society. And so the capitalists have constantly hammered against communism and tried to paint it with the repressions of the Stalin era. And of course, Stalin died in 1950s, 52. But the bureaucracy didn't end with Stalin. And it's one of the reasons that the Soviet Union eventually fell so easily, because they never had a rebirth of the revolutionary enthusiasm of the workers themselves. But communism continues to inspire people around the world. Every part of the world where an economic and social revolution has taken place based itself on Marxism. Some have succeeded. Some are going on right now under Hugo Chavez, attempting to build a socialist movement, a socialist society. Nicaragua, Bolivia is taking the first steps. And even in Ethiopia, where they had a revolution that was overturned eventually with U.S. plotting against it. Zimbabwe. Yeah, there are a lot of places around the world where people still, because you need to fight against a ruling class that squeezes you with racism, cutbacks, war, and oppression, you need some ideology. It doesn't just come from bad ideas or bad people. It's not that, one president after another is bad in this country. It's that what we kind of, people know this. Wall Street runs the country, and that's capitalism. So, communism reflects the ideology and the needs of having worked the entire means of production, the factories, the mines, the mills, the railroads, all of that becomes national property of the whole country under leadership of a working class, and to end the profit system. Now, we said that Stalin's era, especially in the 1930s, was very repressive. But at the same time, the capitalist system entered crisis starting at the turn of the 1900s, when they had carved up the world. All the colonies had been taken, and other countries like Germany had come on the scene with no colonies, because they formed later. And that really led to a fight to redivide these colonies. That was World War I. That didn't settle anything, because they all, except for Russia, Soviet Union, still had capitalist governments, and they still had the profit motive, and part of the profit motive is the drive to have colonies to super exploit people in Asia, Africa, Latin America, wherever. And so they had, after World War I, there was tremendous difficulties, even though there was an economic upturn in some countries. Germany had been defeated in the war and was under capitalist rule still, and they were squeezed more and more with inflation and depression, even once before the World Depression. But in 1919, the World Depression came upon scene. The 1929 economic collapse spread throughout the world, especially the big capitalist countries, and the well, I should go back actually, because after the First World War, the Italian workers rose up, and they seized all the factories. They literally ran the country for a minute there, but they didn't have an ideology or a political party that could lead them to consolidate that, to seize the governmental offices and establish a workers' government. And as that receded, another movement rose up, and this was the first time this was seen. It was under a former socialist called Mussolini, and he took the name fascist movement, or fascism. And what it was, and as we're going to see, was basically that capitalism had been rising pretty steadily through the 1800s, especially the Industrial Revolution in England, France, all the major European countries at least, had a rapidly growing capitalism, and it was kind of a peaceful period. And sure, there were strikes and there was a lot of different things like that, but by and large, the economies grew, and the capitalists allowed, they ran the governments were run by parliaments and Congress in the U.S. and parliaments in Europe. They could allow a very peaceful, it was a peaceful period generally in class relations. They could solve their problems without special measures. But after the First World War, in Italy, the ruling class, the capitalist class, couldn't see a way to keep these, they were scared to death about these workers that had just almost made a revolution. They were very scared because the Russian workers had seized the whole country and made a communist revolution, established a workers' government. And they were petrified, and they didn't feel that just with their laws and their voting and their parliament and their police and army, they could maintain things. And what they felt they had to do was, or a section of them felt they had to do, was finance this movement by Mussolini, which was a mass movement, middle-class movement, and use that movement to smash and destroy the working class, the unions, the sports clubs, the political parties, everything. Destroy, atomize, demoralize, and defeat the working class. And they did that. And it was the first time it had been seen, because up to then everyone thought that capitalism was, was bad, but some people were even in the socialists, the kind of moderate socialists, thought, well, we could replace these guys by getting voted into office. Getting a majority, and we'll just establish socialism by a normal, peaceful voting. And here it was seen something called fascism. And then